You want to know what really happened during the great, world-shattering flood? How the fallen gods, once known as the Watchers, and the Nephilim tried to resist the power of the true God. Then get ready for the ultimate event, because it begins now. The last hour had begun. The end of the old order was near. Strange things were happening all over the world. The sky grew dark, the winds became wild, and the ground shook, as if the earth itself trembled with fear. The animals in the forests and fields grew restless, and the birds fell silent, as if they sensed the coming doom. The false gods felt that something big was about to happen. They gathered at their holy places and called out to the powers of heaven, but the true God remained silent. Their priests and oracles desperately tried to find answers, but there were no signs. The temples, once places of light and power, were covered in an eerie darkness. In Greece, Zeus stood on Mount Olympus, his lightning bolt in hand, but when he looked up at the sky, he saw nothing but a black, endless void. His power began to fade. The nymphs and satyrs around him stepped back, as if they sensed his weakness. The thunder, which once announced his arrival, fell silent. In Mesopotamia, Enlil tried to speak to the stars, but the signs of the cosmos had disappeared. His seers saw only darkness. The sacred rivers, once under his protection, began to dry up and the fields withered. The people who offered him sacrifices began to doubt. In the Mayan jungle, Kukulkan rose into the air, but his wings began to burn. The smoke rising from his wings darkened the sky. The priests who called upon him saw only fire and destruction in their visions. The pyramids dedicated to him began to crumble. And Odin, the wise one, looked into Mimir's well and saw Ragnarok. But it was not the battle he expected. It was the end of all gods. The runes that once revealed the future to him were blank. The ravens that brought him messages did not return. The world tree Yggdrasil began to wither. Then it happened. A beam of light broke from the sky. It was brighter than 1,000 suns and left a trail of fire and smoke. The last fallen angels, still in heaven, who had long ago rebelled against the Most High, were now finally cast out of heaven. They were once mighty beings of pure energy, but now they became physical, bound to the earth. They screamed as they fell, as their essence was forced into mortal bodies. Their wings burned and their once shining auras faded. The people standing in the temples, calling out to their gods, saw how the mighty Nephilim suddenly grew weaker. The gods they had worshipped for so long were not immortal. They were just as lost as the people themselves. The statues of the gods began to crumble, and the altars where sacrifices were made collapsed. The believers, who were once full of hope, fell into a panic. And then it began. The earth opened up and water gushed out. The rivers swelled and flooded the cities. The sky opened its gates and rain poured down. People ran around, looking for shelter, but there was no escape. The flood, which was meant to cleanse everything, had begun. The flood is unleashed. The downfall of the gods. The earth trembled. A deep rumble echoed through the mountains as the sky darkened. People who had walked carelessly through their cities that morning now felt an unnatural chill. The wind shifted. The air was heavy, like before a thunderstorm. But it wasn't an ordinary storm approaching. It was the judgment of heaven. Then it happened. The cloud cover ripped apart, as if an invisible hand had torn it open with brutal force. Water poured down, not in drops, but in mighty streams, as if the sky itself was breaking apart. At the same time, the depths of the earth broke open. Oceans, once hidden in the abysses, shot upwards with unimaginable force. Springs, whose existence no one knew of, spewed water endlessly. Chaos reigned in the cities. People ran to their temples, threw themselves before the statues of their gods, praying, screaming, crying. But those they worshipped, the false gods, could not help them. They themselves were doomed to fall. The last battle of the giants. The Nephilim, the giant sons of the fallen angels, were the first to understand the seriousness of the situation. They who thought themselves invincible felt the end coming. In Greece, Zeus stood on the peak of Olympus. Around him, the titans and demigods gathered. "We are immortal!" Zeus thundered, hurling a lightning bolt into the gathering clouds. But the sky did not answer. His lightning bolt fizzled out. The rain burned like acid on his skin, and his power, which he once held over the elements, was gone. One by one, the titans were swallowed by the rising floods. Zeus fought to the very end, but finally, he too disappeared into the churning waters. In Mesopotamia, Enlil and Enki stood on the ziggurats, watching the Euphrates swallow the city of Ur. Enki, who had once brought knowledge to humans, spoke powerful words of magic, but his rituals were useless. He realized that the true God had seen through him. "We have failed," he murmured before the water swept him away. In Scandinavia, Odin had recognized the inevitable. "Valhalla will fall," he told his warriors. "But our names will not be forgotten." He fought as a god should, but even his spear Gungnir could not stop the waves. The Allfather disappeared with the Aesir into the roaring sea. In Mesoamerica, Kukulkan tried to rise into the air. He spread his mighty feathered wings and ascended. But the floods reached the sky. A whirlpool of water and storm dragged him down, his last cry echoing through the canyons. The earth trembled under the screams of the Nephilim, but no creature could resist the will of heaven. The waves crashed together, the false gods were no more. The earth trembled again, but this time much more violently. The people who had fled to the highest buildings saw the foundations beneath them give way. The floods swept away everything in their path. Houses, trees, entire mountains were swallowed by the waters. The screams of the people mingled with the roar of the floods, a deafening noise that filled the world. In Egypt, the pyramids stood like silent witnesses to the downfall. The priests gathered in the temples and called upon the gods, but their prayers went unheard. The floods reached the sacred sites and swallowed them. The statues of the gods shattered under the force of the water, and the priests were swept away in the whirlpools. In India, Shiva tried to perform the dance of destruction to save the universe. But his steps were interrupted by the floods. The water rose higher and higher, and even the mighty Shiva could not escape it. He disappeared into the roaring waters, his dance unfinished. In China, the Jade Emperor stood on his heavenly throne, watching the chaos on earth. He sent out his dragons to tame the floods, but they were overwhelmed by the waters. The Jade Emperor realized that even his power was not enough to stop the inevitable. The heavenly palaces were swallowed by the floods, and the Jade Emperor disappeared into the depths of the sea. In Africa, the ancestral spirits tried to protect the people. They called upon the forces of nature, but the floods were unstoppable. The spirits were swept away by the waters, and the people who had hoped for their help were swallowed by the floods. The earth trembled one last time, and the floods reached their peak. The people who were still alive clung to the last remnants of their world. But the floods were relentless. They swallowed everything in their path, and the world, as it once was, no longer existed. The false gods had fallen, and the world was submerged in water. But from the depths of chaos, a new order would emerge. The floods would recede, and the earth would renew itself. But the names of the fallen gods would live on in human memory, as a warning of the power of heaven and the fleeting nature of all things. The flood and the false gods. Zeus is the supreme god of ancient Greek mythology and ruler of Mount Olympus. He was the son of the titans Cronus and Rhea, and overthrew his father to claim dominion over the heavens and the earth. As the god of thunder, sky, and order, he was regarded as the highest authority among the gods. His influence was felt throughout ancient Greece, where numerous temples and cult sites were dedicated to him, especially in Olympia. Yet, although he was worshipped as the mightiest of the gods, even Zeus could not withstand the true power of God during the Great Flood. He too was destroyed, along with all others who opposed the Creator. Odin is the highest god of Norse mythology, known as the Allfather, ruler of Asgard, and god of wisdom, magic, and war. He was the son of the giant boar and the goddess Besla, and father to many significant gods, including Thor and Balder. Odin sacrificed one of his eyes to gain deeper insight at the Well of Wisdom, and hung for 9 nights on Yggdrasil to receive the runes. He ruled with foresight but was always marked by the fate of the coming Ragnarok, the downfall of the gods. Yet even Odin, the seeker of all knowledge and master of the runes, had to accept that his power was insufficient. During the Great Flood, he too was swept away, like all the gods who stood against the true God. For contrary to his expectations, the flood was the true Ragnarok he had long foretold. Enki, also known as Ea, was one of the highest gods of Sumerian mythology, the lord of water, wisdom, magic, and creation. As the son of the sky god Anu, he was regarded as a benefactor of humanity, and played a central role in the creation of mankind to serve the gods. Enki dwelled in the deep underworld of Abzu, a mystical watery realm from where he brought knowledge, laws, and technology to humans. He was the one who, according to ancient traditions, secretly instructed the hero Ziusudra, also known as Utnapishtim or Noah, to build a ship in order to survive the flood decreed by the other gods. Yet even Enki, considered the wisest among the Anunnaki, could not endure in the end. When the great flood swept over the world, he too was carried away, like all who opposed the one true God. For against his own plans, the flood was the final judgment, the true end of the old gods. Kukulkan was the feathered serpent god of the Maya, a powerful supernatural being who linked heaven and earth. He was revered as the bringer of knowledge, calendars, agriculture, and civilization, honored both as a god and teacher. In magnificent temples like Chichen Itza, his presence was celebrated, where his image appeared in light and shadow at the equinox. For the Maya, Kukulkan was a divine mediator between worlds, bringing order to chaos and preserving the cosmic cycle. Yet when the Great Flood came, even Kukulkan recognized the supreme power above all gods, for contrary to his hopes, it was the true end, the Ragnarok of the Maya. He too was swept away like all others who defied the one true God. Across the world, ancient traditions tell of a mighty flood that ended the age of mankind. The Hopi Indians spoke of a previous world destroyed by water, sent by the great creator Tayoa to cleanse the earth of human guilt. In Mesopotamia, the god Ea warned the wise Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh of the god's wrath, and an ark was built to save life. In India, Manu, the first man, was warned by Vishnu in the form of a fish before the all-destroying flood. The Aztecs remembered a time when a giant wave swallowed the fourth age. Only those who became maize survived. Even in ancient Africa, the Yoruba tribe told of a great watery catastrophe in which the earth was reordered through divine flooding. A work of the sky god Olokun, who brought civilization from chaos. Thus, peoples from all directions tell the same story, as if they share a single memory. A final attempt to restore balance. Don't think the story ended with the Great Flood. That was only the beginning. The next chapter has already begun, and this time it will not be water that sets us free from the false powers, but Armageddon, the war of God. If you want to know what Armageddon really is, then subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of our latest revelations. And remember this, what others don't know you now do. Now the journey continues. The chosen ones, the salvation of the righteous. Not everyone was doomed. In every great civilization, God chose a special person to save the true human race. These chosen ones weren't just regular people. They were part of a big plan from God to lead humanity through the toughest times. Noah was the first. He spent decades building his ark and people made fun of him. But he heard God's call and obeyed. When the first drops fell, he led his family and the animals onto the boat. The floods lifted them up, while the cries of those drowning faded in the dark. Noah's faith was super strong, and he really showed how much he trusted God's plan. He knew his job wasn't just to save his family, but also to start a new world. Utnapishtim, the wise man from Sumer, was warned by Enki himself. But it wasn't out of kindness. Enki hoped that one of his followers would survive to bring him back to power. But Utnapishtim realized that the Sumerian gods weren't all powerful. As his boat floated on the waves, he prayed to the true God, not to Enki. Utnapishtim understood that real power wasn't with the false gods, but with giving himself to the one true God who was above everything. Ziusudra, the Egyptian priest, had a vision of the coming disaster. He knew the Nile wouldn't just rise, but would swallow the whole land. He built a ship big enough to save his family and his culture's knowledge. While the pyramids disappeared under the waves, he sailed west. Ziusudra wasn't just a priest, he also protected knowledge. He understood that saving his culture was just as important as saving his family. The Hopi Native Americans had their own prophets. A shaman saw a vision of the great serpent that would swallow the land. He led his people into caves underground. They stayed there until the water went down. When they came out, the world was new. Cleaned of the false gods. The Hopi understood that their connection to the earth and spiritual powers would guide them through the disaster. Their prophets weren't just seers, they were also leaders who guided their people into a new time. The flood only spared those who followed the true God. The old empires were gone, and the false gods were forgotten. The chosen ones not only survived, but also laid the groundwork for a new world. Their stories became legends, passed down through generations, to remind humanity of the power of true faith. The chosen ones faced huge challenges when disaster struck. As the flood got closer and the arks and safe places were secure, Noah, Utnapishtim, and Ziusudra were at the edge of their own personal hells. They knew it was time for judgment, and they had to face the highest power. Their trials weren't just physical, they were spiritual too. They had to get over their doubts and make their faith stronger to get through the challenges. In the last moments, as the waters rose and the earth shook, they not only knew they would be saved, but also realized that the true God was above everything. The faith that started out vague and unsure became a strong belief. A belief that carried them through the flood. This belief wasn't just a personal win, but also a sign to humanity that true faith can overcome any obstacle. They had gotten over their doubts. They had realized that the true God ruled over all other gods and powers. And they knew their job wasn't just to survive, but also to share the truth when the water went down and the new world began. Their stories became lessons that would guide humanity through the ages to come. The chosen ones weren't just survivors, they were also teachers and leaders who guided humanity on the path of true faith. Saving the righteous wasn't just an act of kindness, but also a sign of God's fairness. The chosen ones had shown that true faith is stronger than any disaster. Their stories became symbols of hope and faith that would guide humanity through the darkest times. The new world that came after the flood was proof of the power of true faith and the strong dedication of the chosen ones. The chosen ones had done their job. They had led humanity through the flood and laid the foundation for a new world. Their stories became legends, passed down through generations, to remind humanity of the power of true faith. Saving the righteous wasn't just an act of kindness, but also a sign of God's fairness. The chosen ones had shown that true faith is stronger than any disaster.